Oh. Good levels? Should be good. Okay. Yeah. Am I gonna fill the room? There's that many nerds who want to know about point of sale. One minute. Wow, I filled the room. I'm impressed.
Not nearly as effective.
You good? Okay.
You know what has to do with
Good afternoon. This is my talk about how to hack point of sale systems. My name is Forrest. I worked several years as an MSP support for point of sale systems. Overall, we handled, I'd say about 35 clients in total of various systems and various sizes, from little small and pop shops to full-size enterprises that have several story bars and they would fill up on St. Patty's Day. And they're doing several million in a day. This is mostly going to be about table service. Table service is generally like sit-down restaurant or bars. And mostly my focus is going to be on NCR Aloha. It's the most common table service point of sale software out there, right next to ARPAS and Micros. May not mean much, but they're just vendors. So if you actually see like the badges on the terminals for that, most of the time the security is about the same. They're just using Java instead of what Aloha is using. Generally, PCI is a joke. It's very hard to enforce for the smaller industry, like the franchisees. A lot of places, how they're set up is it may look like a singular brand, but in all reality, it's about 1,000 franchisees that are these small companies that just happen to rent the brand. So when you're going to a restaurant, you're dealing with a small company who has no IT budget. So just a forewarning, don't go around hacking your local bar. They will not like you very much, generally because you'll probably crash their point of sale. It's very touchy. If it doesn't like to crash every night. Anyway. So generally, NCR Aloha uses CIFS, NetBIOS, for most communications. It only supports version 1. SMB version 1. Even the newest versions of Aloha only support SMB version 1. If you turn it off, it crashes. For its static files, like menus, employee numbers, things like that, DBase 2. It's really, really old protocol. Well, actually, database format. It has about 600 to 700 individual files that are copied over SMB version 1 to the terminals every morning. Generally for transactions, these are things are constantly changing in between the terminals. It uses unencrypted binpack logged. It's all uint16, every bit of it, with some XML thrown in there because they like to. So things like credit card track data, it does store all 3 tracks. For certain versions of Aloha, generally the most commonly used one, which is Aloha 6.7, it uses a static des key of Aloha. So that's how your credit card data is being stored, and it's doing it for several years. Most people keep 7 years of data on their back of house, which is running Windows XP. Most users are still using 6.7 because plugin support was nuked in the next version. It requires like a $2 million license just to write a plugin, and then the store requires like a $3,000 to $4,000 license just to use plugins. So nobody wants to buy that, so they just keep on the old. This is still technically a supported branch. They're still releasing updates for it, but you have to pay a couple of grand for the updates, so nobody updates. This is extremely common for most point of sales, is that they charge for updates and they charge way too much. So what happens is you get these small mom and pop shops that won't upgrade for 10 years. Generally, the only time they upgrade is when their credit cards stop working, because TLS or something along those lines have stopped working. So generally, it is a massive pain in the ass to support on the MSP side of things. Generally, we only have an hour to get things back up. So technical support is usually very stressed, undertrained. There's no documentation. And so we're very easy to social engineer, where there's no way for us to verify they're actually on the site at all. And generally, we do a lot of backdoors to get into systems. We actively make backdoors into systems so we can get back in. We'll end up using default credentials, things like that. Like generally, out of the 35 clients, we only had 2 that actually use unique credentials per site. They weren't even different in between the terminals. And they were like based off the MAC address. So it's pretty easy to find out what it is, especially if you're compromised a machine. Generally, this is the networking diagram. It's very flat. It has to be. Generally, if you try anything more complicated than this, you're just going to end up with a crashy point of sale. So all of this is an unencrypted connection. It's just obfuscated. If anything, it's just a binary version of it. Amazingly enough, the kitchen display system for Aloha, if you're using Aloha's version of the KDS, it transfers card data to the kitchen screens because it has a copy of the translog. So we just got stuff everywhere. Also, it's connected to the security cameras. They have to be on the same network if they want. They have a feature where they can show the transactions on the security cameras. And so those actually have access to the transaction log as well. There's a huge attack surface once you're inside of a network. Even if you don't have the credentials, the KDS, you can't change the credentials on that, but it's Windows CE 5. So it's got a billion CVEs for it as it is. We actively used exploits to get into terminals that were down, that we couldn't log into anymore, just so we could get them back up under the SLAs. Generally because they're all using what they call POS Ready 2009. It's Windows XP SP2 with no updates because updating is hard and they don't put these on the internet. Oh yeah, if you try to update that, it just dies. You're lucky if the back of house is running Windows XP. We've had a couple of instances where we just moved customers off of Windows 98. And they wanted to go back because it was running faster on Windows 98 than it was running on Windows XP. It was the same version of Aloha. Aloha natively supports Windows 3.11 and forward. So you can actively downgrade connections and things of that sort. So generally spotting Aloha is extremely easy. You want to look for these stupid buttons. They're the only point of sale that actively uses this color scheme. So you notice how like it's this shaded button from like Windows 98. Same thing here with some of the menus. Very easy to spot. They're the only ones that use this kind of teal. Also, this is for bars. Generally, they'll have like this custom layout for their tables. Aloha's the only one that supports this like this, where they can do custom buttons and things, but they'll still have like the shaded buttons on the sides. Also, this is the new version of Aloha. This is Aloha 12 and above. They decided to go the Windows XP route and go with the rounded buttons. That's what they currently use. This is the latest version of Aloha here. Also, generally, if you see NCR hardware, like on the printers or on the terminals themselves, they're always using Aloha. That just comes default. So very common to see VNC servers. It comes default from NCR with the password of Aloha. Nobody changes this. Out of all the customers that we had, the 35 concepts, 40,000 stores, all of them had that. Some of them were firewall it, but the VNC server was still running. And it's like the oldest version of real VNC I've ever seen. I couldn't even tell the version number because it won't tell me. Generally, all admin shares have to be open. It uses a share called boot DRV. It's always open, has to be open. The credentials have to be the same across all of the terminals, and they have to be the same for the back of house as well. So they use the standard credential, and you can't change it. Well, you can, but it causes problems. You just don't want to. It'll end up with just a crashy system that won't authenticate with one another. So very common. These are default in the NCR images that they get from NCR. So when they buy the terminal, they get Aloha with it because they image them because there's like this advanced replacement program. Those are the default credentials that they use. It's very surprising whenever they change it. Usually it's like the higher end places will change those, but then they're the same across the entire place. And since they're LM hashes, they're extremely easy to crack. It has to be LM hashes because of NetBIOS and remote decom. Yeah.
How are PCI inspectors not falling over?
So here's the fun part. NCR has certified that Aloha is PCI compliant if you follow their implementation guide. But no one's audited the implementation guide.
How are they not all up to the retailers part?
Well, they push it back onto the people who are implementing it. I've gotten into a fight with some of their legal team over this. So it's like, well, it's not actually PCI compliant if it's storing it with a static DAS key. Well, PCI doesn't actually specifically state what kind of encryption you're supposed to use, and if it's a custom crypto, like if you just kind of change how the IV works in DES, then it passes PCI anyway. So that's what they did in the newer version. So you gotta understand, like Aloha 6.7 is from like 2004, and they've just been continuously updating. It is end of life technically. What most people have been doing is that, especially with chip and pen, is they've been moving away from using the card readers on the terminals themselves and moving to external card readers, which have their own host of vulnerabilities on them. But if, like, for instance, gift cards, a lot of people don't consider gift cards PCI data, but even, I mean, in some of the larger chains, they're as good as cash. And they store those unencrypted by default. I don't even think you can encrypt it in Aloha. They stored it as plain XML in the translog. You can just open up a notepad and start pulling gift cards. Or, just putting in your own, because if you VNC into it, and if you use like the support credentials of 911 or 999 or 9889 or some version of that, or just watch somebody log in because it shows the button depresses as they're logging into the terminal, you can just make your own gift cards. Because you can put the gift card number in manually. So you can buy a whole bunch of gift cards that only have like 10, 15 bucks on them and then put $500 on it. Or if like corporate's going to be on site, well, loyalty programs are a huge target as well, where they'll have their own custom codes to log in with for loyalty. And it's like 100% off everything. So those developer codes generally exist across all loyalty programs as well. The trick is like you have to do a little bit of remote recon. Most of them it was like the phone number of one of the admins up high. And that was the loyalty code. But then they spread it among their own customers. So generally, they do not have antivirus products. They will attempt to put antivirus products on them, and then support yells at them enough to remove it. It generally causes enough problems because Aloha does so much on the high level. Like, it injects itself into kernels. It has its own custom driver infrastructure called OPAS. OPAS is extremely common in the point of sale industry. IBM made it, and it's like supposed to be like this middleware for like printers and Mac cards and stuff. And if antiviruses interfere with this, because it works like over some decom structure, and there's like this JSON interface that it uses, and then a little bit of XML, so it tries to intercept that traffic, and it promptly crashes the point of sale. It does not handle this natively at all. So like we've seen instances of like people putting bit 9, and we have to go in and every day train it for, because it modifies its own DLLs every time on a new data business. So you can't like whitelist it based off of Mac or anything like that. And since it transfers it from the back of house to all the terminals every morning, then you can just infect the back of house and then you're on all the terminals. This is the case for most point of sales. Most point of sales that I've seen, like RPOS, Squirrel, Micros, they all do this. They'll do some method of NFS or SMB, generally using weak credentials or some kind of weak auto configuration setting where they will then go ahead and update themselves automatically every day. You can man in the middle and it won't even know. Like I said, it's remote decom and it's in plain text. This is mostly for the communication in between the point of sale and what they call EDC, the electronic draft capture. EDC is what actually handles the credit cards, communicating with the upstream credit card provider over TLS. So, but they don't actively support technically encryption in between the two because it's obfuscated, so you can't actually see the information. It does technically encrypt the card data, but it's a rolling pen that's stored in RAM. So, I mean, generally with this, they don't encrypt the RAM internally, not until the new versions, like Aloha 12 and above. But like I said, nobody runs that. Unless you see the new buttons, they're running the old version. It's extremely common because loyalty programs have generally not moved to the new format. Well, out of all the customers that we only had one that had moved, and they spent a lot of money doing that. There's environmental variables for days. Aloha solely uses environmental variables to figure out where it is. So if you're in the back of house and you want to know where Aloha lives, because they like to put it in random places, just go to Iberdur, and it will take you to the bin folder where you can just copy whatever you want in there, and it will get copied to the terminals. There's a bat file in there that's the launching bat file. You just edit that and put your payload in there, and you're done. And then you have persistent access, and support won't know because they won't look in there. I was a point of sale specialist for like 3.5 years, and we never looked there. I was always fixing the really broken stuff. I did make a special credit card for certain versions of Aloha, which injected a end of record hex into the actual translog when it would read it. And then I put a 32-byte TCP shell in there. So it would shell the terminal. It would decline the card, shell the terminal, and then anything else that read the translog, it would also shell that too. So that would be any of the other terminals where they pull your order, and the back of house when they went to go to do the daily sales. I reported it to NCR, and I was like, "Oh, we've already patched that." Yeah, but it's like 30 versions ahead. Nobody's gone that far.
So you had a malicious card track?
Yeah.
Nice.
I did have to use all 3 tracks, and not all card readers support 3 tracks. Like, depending on the older units, they won't do the 3 tracks. They only do the first 2. Sometimes they only do the first 1. Those are really old ones. So other point of sale systems, generally they use HTTP or common plaintext protocols to communicate. Tomcat 5 and 6 is extremely common. And like Java 1.2 is also extremely common as well. Generally, it's more of the custom ones that you'll see that use Java. And the more custom that it is, they generally lack more and more on security. Most of the time, because all you have to worry about is the card data. And if you just secure that into the external readers, they don't care about the security of the rest of the system. They just want it to work. And it's usually only like 3 or 4 devs anyway. I already covered like the updates cost too much that it never gets updated. Security tends to come third when it comes to all point of sale software. Online ordering, yeah. So I know of a couple of things that you can put in online ordering, and it'll cause their printers to just never stop printing junk. And they'll restart the printer, and they'll go to try to print the ticket again, and they'll just start printing more and more junk.
Shutting the door at one point would just spew out
That's a voltage problem, by the way. You got back gables.
They went out of visibility.
Ah, yeah. So, generally, you understand that these printers, they're Epson TM80s. They're always TM80s. Nobody really uses any other kind of printers in point of sale. They're serial. So, if you can imagine what really doesn't work over serial on a really old point of sale system, I think you can figure out why online ordering will break things, because it's an outside system that injects records into the translog. But they still use a COM port internally. Like it's the best. And then there's like NCR printers, those are the 7197s. They look like a spaceship for no reason. Those work fine. It's just the old Epsons. I mean, they still use impact printers, TMU 220s, and those are the real big loud ones. Those really hate that particular encoding. We've only seen a couple of .NET ones. There's a Linux one that's Squirrel. It's running Linux kernel 2.1. They haven't updated the software in years. I'd actually probably almost call it decades. And it's becoming more and more popular, Squirrel, because it's a relatively cheaper option. And it works decently. But I know a couple of clients that use that. Also, documentation is completely... It's just not, it doesn't exist. Trying to get support documentation in an NCR, they don't have it. They barely have an internal database themselves. I mean, they'll tell you, like, if a very common occurrence in point of sale is corrupted databases, and they'll just tell you, oh, yeah, you lost all your sales for the entire day. They won't even try to fix it. They won't try to fix anything, actually. They'll just tell you to reset it a bunch of time or buy new hardware. So they don't make internal documentation for themselves. And then the actual manuals for Aloha, they're almost non-existent. They're a 30-page document that tells you how to install it. That's about it. So generally, technical support, whenever we're trying to fix things, we have to do these backdoors because there's no documentation to try to get these things online. Generally, most point-of-sale systems have some method of decoding credit cards. Every one of them that I've seen do not permanently encrypt or hash credit cards. They will obfuscate if you do not have the right privilege levels, but there's always a privilege level that you can escalate yourself internally to get credit card data. So even if you don't know the type of point of sale, just wait until the manager logs in. Actively watch the back of houses, wait until the manager logs in. Or cause credit card problems where they have to log into the credit card system to pull old cards. And then there you go. They have some form of decoding. I know with Aloha, you can just blank out the password in the emp.dbf, which is the employee database, and it'll let you log in. You can set your own access levels in there as well. Only works on 6.7 though. The newer versions, they use the cloud databases, and it's a little harder. You have to know SQL, but it does the same thing. Phishing as managers, we have, at least in my call center and most of the others that I've talked to, we have no official way of determining that they're even on site. And most of the time, managers are too dumb to actually realize that they're even on site themselves. So we just have to kind of work through it. So if you're, you can probably lead on most of my tier 1 and tier 2 agents to exploit themselves. So there's that. Especially if you call in as like a franchisee, then the franchisee is expected not to know anything about the restaurant. And just because it's a high-end restaurant doesn't mean their software is. Aloha 6.7 with Windows XP all the way around, some of the restaurants were pulling in $2 or $3 million a night. And their tips were matching. Those are the fun ones, especially when you got to run credit cards and the payment processor says no because you just charged $1 million in cards in one night. Overall, at our call center, we had to clean off viruses off of terminals and servers daily with no disclosure policy. Matter of fact, they probably fire us if we ever disclose that which customers got hacked. Ransomware was extremely popular. I've only seen one targeted attack against a restaurant. It was a restaurant chain. They came in over an Excel, sent them a catering order, and it had a macro bug in there. They actually told them to turn on the macros. They actually guide the caller, enabled macros on the machine, and then exploited the box. And they did that across 3 different restaurants in the Bay Area. And they pulled all data. They downloaded every single translog and credit card that had been on there since, and they had records back 10 years. I imagine most of the cards are dead. There is a program that's supposed to run called CleanPan. It's a cron job, but most of the time it's broken. So, and it's not like there's any reporting on if it's working. That's how they get around the whole PCI storage thing, is that CleanPan is supposed to be working, but there's no monitoring for it. Monitoring is a huge thing in point of sale that it just doesn't exist. EMV is the future. Most places hate it, especially table service, because they like their old tip structure, where they take your card, they go run it, and then they return a receipt to you and you write down your tip. Well, now they have to buy a separate device. It's usually like an Android-based thing that NCR has, and then they swipe it at the table, and then you can put in your tip while you're signing there. They're very expensive, and they're prone to breakage. They use some bad RF frequency that tends to just be serial-based, and generally from what I've seen with my SDRs is that it's not encrypted, it's just encoded. But it uses HTTP to contact the upstream encoders, so even if it's EMV, it doesn't matter. But they're swiping cards on those. So I know that most point of sale is not trained to look for sniffers or any of the EMV stuff. I mean, the card stripe readers. They don't know how to inspect them or anything like that for any kind of implants. Generally they trust the hardware a little bit too much, like we'll image them, and it's a supply problem. There's a huge supply chain that's involved with point of sale. I mean, we generally have low-paid interns doing the actual imaging, so we've actually had issues in the past of them running like Bitcoin miners on them. It was a couple of years ago, though. This is a link to the slides. This is a QR code for everybody to see. Generally, I know I only covered like the bare bones, but if anybody has any questions, though. No, it's Google Drive. Yeah.
So you pay cash when you go out to eat?
No. Because generally what happens is that they're not using EMV anymore. It's the restaurant's responsibility to cover all chargebacks and any kind of fraud that happens. The shift officially happened now. So it's a responsibility thing. So if they link a breach to you, then you're responsible for all the fraud that happened on that card and the multiple cards. It will ruin businesses, and it has. I've seen it happen a couple of times. But if you use EMV, you get a lower percentage rate on your charges. It's impossible to charge back on half the time, and generally you only have to. They'll give you the readers now, and it just requires Ethernet. So more and more places need to switch over to EMV, but it's not happening at the adoption rate that the industry wants. Yeah, that's the little SIM card looking thing on your credit card. Which, amazingly enough, those run Java, by the way. Yeah, it's global platform, it's called. It's a form of Java. All of those smart card type stuff is all Java. It's a small form of it. Yeah.
What's the point of paying for a point of sale system if there's just as bad as the open source?
Because they don't have anything else. I mean, so the Aloha feature set, like if it was a secured system, is actually pretty amazing. It has a lot of stuff in there. It will manage your entire store. It'll order stuff for you. It'll handle all the inventory tracking. It'll handle all the HR stuff. So it'll actually do people's taxes for them as well. But you have to but it stores like the social security numbers and everything as unencrypted text in the databases. Which, by the way, DBFs can be opened up in Excel. Just don't save them or it will blow up the point of sale. Anything else? Yeah. Yeah, so the terminals that are running on wireless, it probably isn't an Aloha system. Like there's the hipster point of sales, which are like on iPads and things of that sort. I still wouldn't trust them as far as I can throw them due to the fact that generally we all know how app security is on like iOS and Android. And generally they have less auditing because they haven't paid for it. It's like a couple million just to get PCI certified for your point of sale.
What is the best practices you would recommend for
So I've only seen one place that got close. They had automated rotating passwords using like a PowerScript shell. They hardened all of their Ethernet cables going into the terminals and everything, so you couldn't remove them. They were running Windows 7. They had patches on them. They would test the patches beforehand and then deploy them to all the sites. They did run an antivirus. They did have to put exclusions for Aloha in there, unfortunately. So, I mean, you could probably still infect the bin folders, which has all the binaries in it, and do nasties in there, but very restrictive networks. Not even their back of houses technically have internet. They have very good firewalls. Generally, if you have something, it's modern enterprise security, really. Aloha itself's not that hard to deal with. It's just that there's some workarounds that you have to do. But generally, modern enterprise security, you get an ACK on there, you secure your passwords, you update everything, and you're fine. And especially if you run the newer versions of Aloha, like Aloha 17 is actually a relatively secure product. They rewrote it in .NET. But it's not compatible with the older versions or anything like that. So you have to get new plugins, new loyalty, new gift cards, the whole shebang, if you update to that. Yeah. At the time, it was email. Using old versions of Outlook or through the web, people be browsing weird websites in the back of houses. I mean, I'm talking about like backcountry places that have like a small computer. They're still on dial-up. We still had sites that were on dial-up. Actually, to the credit card industry, dial-up processing is still considered more secure than TCP-based dial-up. Even though the actual connection in between the credit card processor is not encrypted over the modem. They only obfuscate the password. I'm not terribly sure, mostly because I think they just haven't considered it. That's usually what it is most of the time when I ask like questions about that. It's like, oh, we never thought about that. Oh, it doesn't matter. No, that'll never happen. I get a lot of that too. Any others? Is that it? Alrighty, well, it's been fun. By the way, if anyone was wondering, my hat is a Wi-Fi monitoring station. It's been recording all the Wi-Fi in the entire con.